Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. I'm Trey Grayson. I'm the director of the Institute of Politics. Full disclosure, I am a Republican. And we're really excited to have everybody here. This is our first official forum of the so-called spring semester here at Harvard. We're really excited to have all of you here. This is a great crowd. We've got a great panel. All of you, I think, got a chance to get a program so that you have more detailed bios. I'm not really going to do really long introductions for our panelists. We're just going to dive right in. I'll do a quick intro. I'm going to ask one question to kick it all off, and we'll dive in, bring you guys into the conversation, and we'll go from there. So to each of you, if you could just address, in the last election, our party didn't do very well. You know, there were some wins, some highlights, some things like that. But in general, the president was reelected. The Republican Party lost seats in both the House and the Senate. And over the last couple of months, a lot of Republicans have been asking questions about, you know, how can we do better? How can we win elections in the future? How can we get good policies passed, that sort of thing? What kind of advice would you give if you could wave a wand to make the next election and the future elections work out better for the party? And we'll just kind of go down the line, and then we'll take it from there. So to my immediate left, who's going to answer the first, is Ron Christie. Ron was an IOP fellow about a year and a half ago. He claims it was the best fellows class. They're all the best fellows classes, Ron. Okay. Ron worked for President Bush. Actually got to start working for then Representative John Kasich, and is now a consultant in Washington and New York City with Christie Strategies. So Ron, why don't you start us and we'll work our way down.
Thank you, Trey, and good evening, everybody. It's an honor and a privilege to come back here and to see so many of the friendly faces who were here during my time as a fellow. So thank you all for coming and to hear about the future of the Republican Party. I actually had an interesting experience this morning, Trey, to answer your question. I was taking the shuttle flight from Washington, D.C. up to Boston on this morning, and two of the flight attendants said, would you just hang back for a minute while we let the rest of the folks off the plane? I said, well, that's unusual. I said, sure. And so they waited. Everybody was off the plane, and they said, you're a Republican, so are we. And they said, and so is the captain. And I said, so you waited for...
That was rare.
Right. And I said, so you waited for everybody else to get off the plane. Why? And they said, did you read the article in the Boston Herald this morning about the future of the party? And I said, I hadn't, so of course they gave it to me. And they said, the Republican Party has made an error. They didn't reach out to as many young people on college campuses. They didn't reach out to as many people of color, and they were seen as being hostile and angry. So if you guys in Washington look angry, don't reach out to young people, and don't utilize technology, you're going to be in the minority. And I think that counsel given to me this morning, Trey, was right.
Good. So Kerry Healey was the Lieutenant Governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts from 2003 to 2007. She was also an IOP fellow. Your class was probably the best.
I think it was the best.
Best class,
yes, actually,
of
yes.
IOP fellows.
Yeah.
And was a senior advisor to Governor Mitt Romney during his presidential campaign.
Thank you very
Glad to have
much.
you back.
Yeah, and by the way, people always whisper about being Republicans in Massachusetts, just so you know. Like, no one will actually, they'll always tell you, like, confidentially, you know, just so you know. So I have recently written an article after going to the RNC meeting. I'm currently the National Committee woman from Massachusetts, which means I'm one of 3 people who get to represent Massachusetts on the RNC. And as you can imagine, it was a pretty interesting meeting this year. I wanted to go there and see how much of that criticism, of those concerns, had really sunk in to the party core. You know, I'm not saying that what the RNC does completely impacts the party, but it certainly is a good measure of what our core activists are thinking and feeling if they feel like they have to do something different. And what I saw there was a genuine attempt to start thinking through, okay, who amongst us has been doing things right? And so they were bringing in all the people who had been doing outreach to African Americans, to Hispanics, to women, to young people, to Asian Americans, and they were listening to them for the first time. And you could tell how surprised, honestly, some of them were to be up there in front of the RNC, having the opportunity to talk about the work that many of them were deeply passionate about, but they had been sort of laboring away on in complete obscurity for years, and they were being brought to the center. So that gave me some encouragement, and that is the first part of what needs to be done. I'd say the second part of what needs to be done is those folks need to get funded. You know, if those are good ideas, they've been piloted now for many, many years. Let's push them out. Let's give them more funding. And I think Reince Priebus is absolutely ready to do that. So that was the optimistic piece. What I was less optimistic about is that the other part of what needs to be done is that we need to come together, not under a big tent, because I don't think anyone is going to give up their identity, but as a coalition of conservatives. And we have very different conservative camps right now, which add up to just about half the country. But we don't vote that way. And so we need to bring together right now, as a party, bring together the libertarian-leaning conservatives from the Ron Paul movement, all those energetic young people who totally mastered social media and all of the technology that we really need to get better at. We need to bring together the moderate Republicans in the Northeast that are about to give up the ghost. You know, the moderate Republicans have been very discouraged because there's been a glass ceiling in our party for years and years above which they could not rise, and eventually that makes people die out. But if we were to be able to harness these three groups as a coalition of conservatives with a core of beliefs around not social policy, but economic policy, foreign policy, states' rights, I believe that could be a winning strategy to bring us back to a competitive point.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks. Next is Karen Hughes. Karen was a counselor to President George W. Bush and is a member of the current IOP fellowship class. She and John Murray, who will speak next after her, I think their class is the best.
I was going to say, I have to speak for the spring 2013 fellows. We're going to show all the rest of them up. So,
so Karen, what advice would you give? Your old boss was the last Republican elected president.
Well, and I actually worked closely with President Bush to define his domestic policy as compassionate conservatism. And I think that's where we lost our way, because where I got that from, he was being interviewed by a reporter once, and the reporter said to him, how do you describe your philosophy? And he said, well, I'm a conservative. And the reporter actually said, you don't sound like a conservative. When you talk about immigration, when you talk about education, when you talk about young single moms, when you talk about Hispanics, you don't sound like a conservative. And the president said, call me a conservative with a heart. And I turned that into compassionate conservatism. And what that said was that a conservative philosophy could be optimistic and hopeful. And I think that's where we've lost our way. We don't sound optimistic and hopeful. We need to be, once again, the party that provides a ladder to opportunity. And one of the unfortunate things about the infamous 47% comment is it sounds like we thought there's 47% of the people that basically were writing off and would never be with us and aren't part of our coalition, and that simply isn't true. I mean, look at us on this stage. I mean, we've got young people, we've got women, we've got an African American, look at us. I mean, we're Republicans. And I don't think we showed that side of republicanism. I also don't think that we talked about our policies. We're never going to become the party of big government. We're always going to be for limited government. That doesn't mean we're against all government. And so I think the way we talk, we believe there is a role for a properly limited government. We don't want it to be too big because that crowds out personal responsibility, individual opportunity, the private sector initiative. And we don't talk about our policies, I don't think, in ways that have been resonating with people in their daily lives. When I started my career, I was a television reporter, and I had a producer who every time I would give a story, he'd say, what does this mean for the average teacher? Or what does this mean for the average parent with a child in schools? And we're not talking about our policies with that filter of what does this mean in people's lives. And so from my expertise as communications and from a message perspective, I think our tone was wrong in recent years. I agree on that, we did not do effective outreach, and we need to get a lot better at organizing. I was the executive director of the Republican Party of Texas at a time when we only had 2 statewide elected Republicans, and we managed to take all 17 state offices over a period of years in the 1990s, and we still have them today. And so, we did it by recruiting great candidates. We did it by organizing and out-organizing the Democrats, and we did it by articulating our conservative philosophy to Texans in a way that resonated in their lives, and that's what I think we need to do nationally. I will say, though, with all the bad news, we do have 30 Republican governors who are governing very effectively in states across this country, and we need to look at what they're doing successfully in their states as a good model for us nationally.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Next up is John Murray. John is also a member of the so-called Best Fellows class ever.
Ever.
Best ever. John is the president of the YG Action Network, YG Action Fund, which is a 501c4 super PAC organization to elect House Republican or candidates. Was also Deputy Chief of Staff for Eric Cantor, who gave an interesting speech yesterday that I think addressed some of what Karen was talking about. John, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I want to build on what Karen said. I joined Eric's team in 2009, which I remember seeing Time Magazine about the day that I had accepted the job, and it said something like the end of the Republican Party, and I was like, well, this is a great time for me to get on board this train. But you know, honestly, at the time, I remember there were 176 members of the House, and we had a 70% approval rating, new president, a very exciting time in the country. And I remember meeting with the leadership team at the time, Minority Leader Boehner and Whip Cantor and others. And one of the things we decided at that moment was we could not be a party of simply disagreeing with the president, of simply saying whatever they want to do, the answer is no. We made a very focused decision to fight over the battle of ideas by offering alternatives. And I remember very clearly the first trip we took to the White House to sit down with the president to talk about the stimulus package. And Eric was sort of new to taking some of these trips. And I remember he said, well, we should bring our alternative. And we said, well, sure, why not? I mean, he's got a plan, we should have a plan. And we came to the White House and we sat down, and Eric said, would everyone like to see my plan? And the president, and I remember the look on his chief of staff at the time, Rahm Emanuel's face, he was like, don't do it. And the president like, sure, hand it out. And so, but the point is it gave us a moment and an opportunity to be for something instead of just against something. And my biggest concern right now, and I left Eric's office in the fall of 2011, was we've sort of gotten away from articulating a vision that is not just a counter-proposal, but an offering a different choice. And I think this country understands, and if you look at the polling, everyone's aware that choices need to be made. The question is what is the option that we're presenting, and how does that dovetail into the larger purpose of the average American family? And I agree with Karen, that's the other challenge I think we face, is we've gotten away from articulating the value proposition at the kitchen table. We've gotten into a pitch battle over spending, and I personally believe we do need to address the debt and the debt. And I think all of us play a role in thinking about how this country is going to move forward under the current conditions that it is in. But if we are not articulating why it matters to you, not just the principle of cut the government or cut spending, but how is it going to impact you in a real way, then we're going to lose that argument. And for Eric, I ran his comm shop as well. And that's a lot of how we spend our time, is how are you connecting? And where are you connecting? And I think that in order for us to have an effective future electoral, positive electoral outlook, we're going to have to get back to connecting, because I think we have policies and ideas, but if we're only debate societying them inside the dome amongst each other, we're not really reaching out and we're not going to be successful.
Tonight's final panelist is Anna Navarro. Anna, you may have seen on CNN, where she's been a contributor and has been appearing more and more frequently. She was a top advisor to Senator John McCain's 2008 presidential campaign, as well as Governor John Huntsman's 2012 presidential campaign. We're really glad to have her. She's not yet a member of the Best Fellows class ever, but we're hoping to sell her on the IOP, so y'all be nice to her, so maybe she can spend some more time with us in the future. Anna.
Well, I'm from Miami, so what I do know is that if I do come and be a fellow, it's not going to be in the winter. Well, the good part about being last is that I get to say all of the above. What did we do wrong? What's the advice? All of the above. We had bad outreach. We had bad message. We had bad tone. We had bad messengers. I think you take the 2012 campaign and make it a manual on what not to do. Karen is completely right. Somewhere in the process, we have lost the heart of the conservatives. Somewhere in the process, conservatives have become and sound to others as righteous, judgmental people. We somehow, made gays believe we wanted to neuter them. We made Hispanics believe we wanted them to deport themselves. We made young girls in college think we were going to make it really hard for them to have sex. Well, guess what? That's not really a very good way to get anybody but old white men to vote for you. So, on the Hispanic part, really, it could not have been worse. I've said before, I think Mitt Romney lost this election in the primary. He self-deported from the White House. And I think our primary process was incredibly destructive. On the Senate side, in the presidential race, really forcing candidates to go unnecessarily so far to the right. And then I think in Romney's case, he had an acute case of flip-flop paranoia that didn't allow him to shift to the center during the general. And so we had the primary candidate practically the entire time. Now, I think there's a silver lining to this. We have now learned that it is unavoidable to have a wake-up call, that we can rack up all the white, older male vote we want, but that's not enough, and that if we don't want to be in political oblivion, we have to do better with women, with Hispanics, with African Americans, with everybody. That we can't just be a niche party. And we are seeing a lot of introspection all over the place in the party. I just came from the Republican House retreat last month, and the same thing that Kerry was just describing is what I observed in the House retreat. And I was impressed by how many of them are interested in party building, about how many of them care about doing better. I was expecting to go into a den of crazy fringe people, and to my surprise, there's more rational, really nice Republicans who are decent public servants than meets the eye. It's just that oftentimes the media likes to put the wackos on TV because they make good TV. So I think there is, everywhere in the Republican Party, the RNC, the governors, the House Republicans, the Senate, we are seeing that this introspection is leading to things, for example, like John Boehner and Mitch McConnell agreeing to have Senator Marco Rubio give the response to the State of the Union. It's going to be the first time a Hispanic does that, and he's doing it in English and Spanish. That sends a tremendous message, and it's just one of the things that I think is going to come out of this process, which was a terrible process.
Thanks to all of you for those opening comments. Just a reminder for those who are following or following us on Twitter, it's GOP Future, hashtag GOP Future is the hashtag we're using for this. We've talked a lot about, and I think you all have done a pretty good job of addressing what I would describe as the marketing challenges of the party. I want to explore maybe another possible way to react to what happened and reposition for the future. Are there certain policies that the party or lots of members of the party, we might need to, the party may need to shift on a couple of actual policy issues, not just selling the party better, but actually changing. And two that I had in mind were immigration, which seems to be happening, and gay rights, which is another one. I wanted to see if any of you wanted to weigh in on the concept or those two issues in particular. Maybe there's some others.
I don't think Republicans need to shift. What I think Republicans need to do is accept diversity of thought. Not every Republican is anti-gay. I believe in homosexual rights. And nobody should tell me that because of that I am less conservative or I am a rhino. I think we need to become less judgmental and less righteous amongst ourselves. We can't have labels and we can't have a litmus test on what a conservative makes. You know when you're a Republican, you know when you're a conservative, you know when you stand for freedoms, even if it means sexual freedoms and the freedoms of people to love each other, even if they're of the same gender. So it's okay to be a pro-choice fiscal conservative. It's okay to be a pro-gay rights foreign policy conservative. We need to become a party of diversity of thought, where that is welcome and embraced, and where we're not just speaking to a narrow, fringe of America.
I know, Kerry, yeah.
And this was the conservative coalition that I was proposing. I think that if you have that coalition, it automatically introduces that acceptance of diversity of thought. You're going to have libertarians who don't care about those social issues, who want the individual to be free to express themselves either sexually or in many other ways. So that's going to be attractive to a lot of people within the party. And we're not asking any social conservative to change their mind on perhaps religious values that they hold very dearly around marriage. But what we are saying is give equal status and respect and opportunity within the party, both to libertarian-leaning Republicans and also moderate Republicans like myself and others in the Northeast who are very open to a broader membership and participation within the Republican Party.
Sure. Karen, I see you nodding along, and you want
Well, I
to
was going to say, part of it is, again, language does matter. It's an important part of it. So, for example, Governor Bush, President Bush, was pro-life. I'm pro-life. But he didn't talk about it in a way that said, if you're pro-choice, you have to leave, or you're not Republican enough, or you're not welcome in my coalition, or to support me. What he said was, and what I've always said is, I'm pro-life. I have many friends who are pro-choice. Surely we can all agree that we ought to work together on policies like promoting adoption. There are ways to reduce abortion, and people on both sides of the issue agree with that. Let's find some common ground. I think the same thing is true on immigration reform. A lot of it is the way we talk about the issue. President Bush understood it in very human terms. It was not just a policy issue, it was also a human issue. It was an issue of rights for people who are preyed upon often, who are brought across the border and die, unfortunately, when they're brought over in trucks. And every couple years we have a horrible situation in Texas where some of these poor people are brought across the border. He understood. He used to say in Texas we have tios and tias, aunts and uncles on both sides of the Rio Grande. There are family ties in Texas, and he understood. He started his career in the West Texas oil fields, where a lot of the workers were illegal immigrants, and he saw how hard they worked, and he saw that they came here out of desperation to try to feed their families, and he understood that on a very human level. And when you understand that, it makes you talk about it very differently. Now, from the other side of the coin, there are also people in Texas and in many border states that have seen the human problems from a different perspective. They've seen the crowding in the hospitals, in the schools. They've felt almost that parts of their country don't feel like America even, because people are coming and not learning to speak English and not really assimilating, and that's threatening to them. So it's an emotional human issue, and I think we have to recognize that in policy terms. And in terms of changing policy, I do think the one area where Republicans are going to have to understand is that we have to make some accommodation for the 11 million people who are here. And I don't believe that we should, I think as a matter of fairness, we shouldn't let them cut in line. We shouldn't let people who came here illegally jump in front of people who came here and followed the rules. But I do think we have to offer some sort of path to citizenship for that 11 million people. And there are some in my party who don't agree with that. And I think those of us who believe that and see the impact of that, particularly people who've been here 20 years and reared their families here and consider themselves very much a part of America. We have to make some sort of policy accommodation, I think, that will allow those people to perhaps pay a fine, to do something to make things right and fair, but allow them a path to citizenship.
John.
Little different angle to it. As a super PAC guy, the other thing I spend my time looking at are candidates and winning. And we invested a lot of money in candidates who can't win. And I think that we need to begin to think about, not just from an issue perspective, but if you're going to engage in a House race in the state of Massachusetts, then you better have a candidate that fits his district. And what I keep seeing us do is trying to retro people based on a sort of litmus test set of rules into districts that they cannot win. And I'm accountable to the people who give us money. And I cannot go to them after a cycle and say, well, I blew the budget on this guy who clearly had no chance of winning in this district. So for me, there's a political piece to this, which is political power provides you the avenue to make policy change. And the part that I don't get about some parts of our party are they would rather be in a position to not impact policy but have a litmus test reason to either run or not run. And I just don't understand that. I mean, we invest in the effort to get people elected who are going to come and be representative of the places that they're coming from. So the person in Massachusetts isn't going to look like the person in North Carolina, but that's how it's supposed to be. And as we move forward, I can tell you for our super PAC, and YG stands for Young Guns, and Young Guns is a program that started by Paul Ryan, Kevin McCarthy, and Eric Cantor, specifically because, and this was at the campaign committee for the House in Washington, specifically because we did not have a way to vet candidates in a meaningful way based on district. It was sort of like, well, I guess it's your turn. So we'd put that candidate up, maybe they'd win, maybe they wouldn't. The point is that we have systematically begun to look at, and this is at the House level, people who are capable of competing in their district and that fit the makeup of the district. And yes, there are some very red districts that are going to have people who are going to think very differently from people in purple districts, and maybe even some little more blue districts that we can compete in. But the point is, if we do not try to compete, if we do not reach out to millennials and Gen Xers, if we do not think about the issues as they resonate in a particular area, we will be a minority regional party that is only in the places where we have gerrymandered red districts. And that is, you cannot win a Senate race that way, and you cannot win a presidential that way.
One of the biggest problems, I think, writ large for the dysfunction that we're seeing in the political process right now is the whole nature of districts. So everybody in Washington is scared to death of being primaried. That's the new political term, that you're going to be primaried. That means you're going to, if you're a Republican, someone's going to run at you from the right if you don't go far enough to the right. If you're a Democrat, someone's going to run at you from the left. There aren't very many districts. Charlie can tell us, he's the expert. How many districts are really swing districts?
We've got 25 right now.
So
25.
That's Charlie Cook, Political Report, IOP fellow. He said
Yeah.
25.
Class
Yeah, 25 swing. He didn't have a mic.
25.
Yeah.
Where there's a contest. So the contest is in the Republican primary and the Democratic primary, and that pushes both parties to the further extremes. And frankly, there's not a super PAC for moderates. I mean, who's out there saying, let's have a super PAC for people who want to compromise in Washington, or people who want to get along in Washington, or people who are willing to work together to find common ground, and that's a problem.
Well, let me take a different tack on this, Trey, because I think, we've talked about the social issues and we talked about immigration. Republicans should have cleaned the clock of the president in this race based on who we are as Republicans. Republicans are for limited government. They are for a pro-tax cut, pro-growth rate, and for a strong defense. And if you look at what's gone on over the last 4 years of the percentage of spending to GDP, where the post-World War II average is, say, 18 to 19%, we're spending about 24%. We're spending far too much money. The entitlements are going to bury all of you and all of us if we don't reform entitlements. The president put together a commission specifically to look at entitlement reform. How do we get our hands around Social Security? How do we deal with Medicare and Medicaid? And at the same time, once this report came out, the president ignored it, and the Republicans let him get away with it. You could go on issue after issue where Republicans, I think, are now afraid of this president with facts. And I was at a meeting this morning with about 40 members of Congress. It was off the record. And some of the Republican folks said, well, the president really cleaned our clock on this. How can we combat him? Can you help us with some good talking points? And I thought, this is not about talking points. This is about having a fundamental understanding of the way that our government works, the way that it's supposed to work, and the way that it is not working. And so long as Republicans feel that they can't play on the same level to compete from a communication standpoint or from a policy standpoint, we're going to lose. We need to not only recruit folks from these swing districts who can run and win, but you've got to know, what does the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 say? Well, it says the President of the United States has to have a budget that is due to the Congress by the first Monday in February. This president has missed that deadline 80% of the time. 4 of the last 5 budgets have been late. What are the consequences of that? The consequences of this are, as John knows when he was up on the Hill, and I dealt with this when I worked for the House Budget Committee Chairman John Kasich, budget resolutions matter. That's why we have the sequester. That's why we continue to have these continuing resolutions where the government doesn't actually explain to the American people, this is why we're spending this amount of money, these are our priorities, here's where we hope to get to. And instead, it's the gotcha game of the media cycle that Anna and I are always sort of duking it out with folks on television. And if you're only talking about defense, you lose. You've got to be on the offense. And I think Republicans, from a policy and a communication standpoint, are on the defense, and you lose if you're defensive as opposed to being on the offense.
I've got a lot of questions I'd like to ask them, but I want to bring you all into the discussion. Hopefully you'll ask the questions I was going to ask. So we're going to begin the question and answer period with the audience. As is our custom here at the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum, we have our 4 microphones throughout the forum area here, 2 on the floor, 2 in the stairwells, in those boxes. The rules are simple. When you begin the question, begin by identifying yourself and telling what affiliation you have. All questions end in a question mark, and they do not contain a speech in the middle. They are questions. And we can take as many as we can, and we'll just start up here in the box since we don't have anybody on the floor yet. We'll start here, Danny.
Hi, I'm Danny Hattem. I'm a second-year MPP here at the Kennedy School. And my question is, we'll start with Dr. Healey, and we can... So Harvard's own Ross Douthat wrote a column immediately after the election when he said that millennials and Hispanics and immigration and gay rights were baubles and distractions, that this was about economic issues. This is why we lost. And since the apparent benefit of the Romney-Ryan ticket was that it would be the face of Republican economic ideas, and they lost badly, is that not indicative of Americans' rejection of supply-side economics and other conservative economic ideas?
I guess I disagree with both of those, both the question and also the underlying assertion that those concerns were just baubles or distractions. I think that young people feel very deeply about having a more open society. I think they not only care about things like gay marriage and access to contraception and abortion issues, but they also care very deeply about the environment, for example. And we haven't addressed that properly as a party. I think there's a whole range of issues in addition to the economy, which I, of course, felt was the central issue that everyone should have been focused on like a laser beam during this last election, but clearly that they were not. But I think that there were any number of issues that we as a party, we missed out on. You know, we could broaden our appeal without changing our positions on this thing or that thing that's particularly controversial if, for example, we had had a more fully articulated policy on Central and South America. You know, if we had talked more about what free trade would really mean with our allies and actually reach out and let people understand what that would mean for various groups within our own voting group, Hispanics and others, if we had said, we really care about Central and South America, and we're going to make an effort to make sure that our economies are integrated. That's an economic message that I think actually would have brought people to the Republican side and would have mattered. And going back to the environment, I genuinely think we have a huge missed opportunity. You know, Republicans were the party that started thinking about the environment and engaging the the nation in preserving our environment. And the fact that we don't even talk about it now is a huge error on our part, and we need to make up some time on that.
Well, I think Republicans need to, we need to walk and chew gum at the same time. We can't just talk about one issue. Yes, the economy was the biggest issue, but, I want somebody that talks to my head and my wallet, but that also talks to my heart and my emotions. It's a lot easier to listen to what somebody's saying about your wallet and about the economy if you like them. if you think they can relate to you, if you think they are speaking to everyday Americans and they feel your pain, something that Bill Clinton was very good at, something that George W. Bush was good at. And so, yes, the economy was the focus. Yes, the economy was the biggest issue, but we weren't getting through because we weren't relating. We need to do both.
Well, I think a couple of things on the economy. One is we had what I call a context hangover. So there was nobody out defending George W. Bush. He left office right after the financial crisis. Nobody ever made the case that that was not a failure of George Bush's economic policies. It was a housing problem at its core. And nobody made that case because there was no vice president from the Bush administration running for president, or there was nobody out there defending him. People just almost didn't want to say his name because popularity of the war and things like that. So nobody was ever out there making that case on the economic policy. So there was a context hangover. Frankly, I think people voted for President Obama despite the economy. The economy is in bad shape. We actually retracted in the last quarter of last year. People think the country's on the wrong track. People didn't like, I don't think, the stimulus and didn't think it worked. They voted for him, I think, as Anna said, finally because they decided they were more comfortable with him than they were with the alternative. I don't think it was about the economy in the sense that people were very worried about the economy, but I don't think it was a referendum on Republican economic principles.
Next question.
Hi.
Yeah, you can move it down. It's okay.
Yeah, way down. I am a registered unenrolled voter. I think that's
what's your name? Speaking with
my name's Sonia Babalia. I have no party affiliation, so I'm just here to listen. Ms. Hughes, I really enjoyed your Politico op-ed soon after the election, especially your threat to cut out some tongues here and there.
That comment got more attention than anything I've said in the last 3 years.
Yeah,
but for me, it was a very powerful comment because...
Can I interrupt for a second? Just for those who didn't read it or hear about it, what was it you said?
Well, I actually said that I was going to cut out the tongue of any Republican man who ever said anything else about rape ever again other than it's a horrific, violent crime.
Okay. Yes.
And it was actually born out of my frustration. It was born of my frustration because I was the executive director of the Texas Republican Party in 1990 when we had a Republican running for governor who made this horrible, he said it was a joke about rape. And it cost him the election. And when I heard about the comments last year, I thought, haven't we learned anything in 20 years?
No.
And so all the young people like you, who are my son's age, my son's 25 now, all the young women that I know, they all think we're a bunch of Neanderthals because of comments.
All right, let's
like
get back to our
those.
question.
So,
I'm
anyway,
I just
sorry.
wanted everybody
That's
to
the context.
Yeah.
So my question is, you also mentioned that a lot of your daughter's friends ended up voting for Obama because of those comments, and it kind of went back to like Claire McCaskill's election bid. I kind of noticed that there were no Republican women speaking out about it. Like people were saying, oh, that's like a bizarre comment for him to make. That's a, not so great thing to say in public. But I didn't see many Republican women stand up and say that is absolutely wrong for him to have said that. And I was just wondering if you have any idea why.
That's an interesting point. I don't think we saw very many Republican women's faces in the last campaign, frankly. And that's too bad. I mean, not enough at any rate. And I don't really know why. I spoke out at the time, but I was in Texas, so probably didn't get as much, and it wasn't quite as harshly as I did after the election. Because again, you don't want. I was not in, I was supporting Governor Romney, but I wasn't part of his campaign, and so you don't want to say something that'll upset the that'll cause problems.
Well, again, these comments were really not by Romney; they were by.
No, and he did speak out against them. No, and he spoke out against them.
And he spoke out against them
very strongly against them.
Immediately
Right.
and clearly. So,
Right.
Yeah.
But you're right. We didn't see a lot of Republican women say many things, and I don't know why that is.
Well, let me take that not from a Republican woman, but from a Republican guy standpoint. I mean, I go on MSNBC every week, and they try to throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at you and try to cut you off. I was on talking about this very subject, and Chris Matthews said to me on Harbaugh, he goes, well, you Republicans, you're just a bunch of troglodytes. And I said, Chris, that's a big word for you, but again, yes, thank you. But the fact of the matter is that it's so easy for the media and for Democrats to paint the Republicans with one brush. But if a Democrat, say Bob Menendez from New Jersey, is under allegations of supposedly going to a different country and supposedly engaging in underage prostitution, you don't hear about that. And so I think that when we assess the way that Republicans react to issues, Governor Romney immediately came out and repudiated those comments. The party elders, many of them came out and repudiated that. So you can't think that 2 or 3 people are speaking for an entire party for Republicans, but Democrats aren't put to the same standard.
I don't think we came out hard enough. And you know, I remember he was on, Governor Romney was in an ad for one of those candidates. I also remember when Rush Limbaugh made his comments about, you know, Sandra Fluke, that, you know, we could have been stronger. We could have left absolutely no doubt that we repudiated, we condemned, we found them disgusting. This is not what we stood for. Instead of trying to massage the thing, say, you know, it's not the language I would have used. You got to go further. People, when you hear something that's that offensive, people want a strong defense. And I think it's one of the lessons we learned, that we must strongly stand up against crazy comments that are not representative of the party. That when somebody in Sioux City, Iowa, says something that is offensive to Hispanics, my gosh, the rest of us have got to stand up and say, this is not representative. It's wrong. It's crazy. And you know what, Hispanics? This is not what we stand for. And we have to say it loud. We have to say it fearlessly. We have to say it strong. And we have to say it everywhere.
Just because this is being taped,
Yeah.
I want to make it clear that Governor Romney made that commercial endorsing Aiken before the comments, and he condemned the comments roundly. So.
Well, we tried to get him out of the race, too.
Yes.
I mean, the party did ask him to get out of the race
And the
and tried to
senatorial
replace him
committee
with
did,
another
yeah.
candidate. So I think there were some, you know, there were strong comments made. I do think it's an interesting point that I don't remember seeing a lot of Republican women speaking out, and that's an interesting point.
Hi, my name is Ram Shah. I am an American Muslim Republican from Chicago at the Kennedy School. So I'm a near extinct
He's
near
really
extinct
lonely.
species.
Be nice to him.
Lots of diversity there.
I had to gather a lot of courage to even stand over here amongst my friends. My question to you is, I've heard a lot about the Republican Party wants to be more inclusive, and I've heard that multiple times. I'd like to better understand, other than just being an abstract concept, what specific steps, what specific action strategies does that mean in order to accomplish that? And could that potentially mean not just speaking against or about some of these fringe elements, as Anna mentioned, but how about expunging them from the party at the risk of reducing the base?
How about Ron?
Well, look, you know, for me, I think that one of the things that upsets me so much in our political discourse today, when people talk about Republicans and, you know, how we need to reach out to this and that, is that it sounds like we're a party of hyphens, right? Oh, African Americans, you know, Hispanic Americans, this Americans. We're Americans. Why is it that Republicans are differentiating people based on their color? I don't like that. I think that if you have the right policies, if you have the right agenda, it's going to appeal to people of color, appeal to women, based on your ideology. And I don't like the self-segregation. The other thing, and Karen and I both know this well, that I think that President Bush was so very effective about, was that he laid out his principles of, this is who I am as a leader. This is where I think we should be going. And then he brought all folks together, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, and said, how can we best govern the country? And so I think that if we try to move forward and say, this is the Republican, our way or the highway, I think we will forever lose that. And that we also recognize that as our former boss said, that one thing that we need to confront, and I believe that the civil rights issue of the 21st century is the power of an education. And if we can't combat that soft bigotry of low expectations, that people of color can't compete equally because they're poor, because they're black, because they look this way, then we've already lost. Let's make sure that all of our kids can compete, regardless of the color of their skin or their gender, and make sure that all of our kids have that equal opportunity.
And I was just going to say, we hadn't mentioned the issue that I think is most important for the future of the Republican Party until just then, and that's education. because we have to be the party that provides that ladder of opportunity, and that the first rung of that ladder is education. And it's, Americans are really concerned about their public schools. I saw a recent survey that said I think the concern is higher than it's ever been about the status of our public schools. We've got to be the party that's committed to fairness and providing that step up on that ladder of opportunity to every child, no matter where they live in this country. And President Bush did always talk about reading as the new civil right, and it's true. It's vitally important to helping people, achieve the American dream. And here at this, great university, you're all here because you succeeded, and you had people and teachers that invested in you, and that parents that encouraged you, and need to make sure that all our kids in this country have that opportunity. In fact, I was asked by Texas Monthly Magazine a few years ago if I could do one thing to change the future of Texas, what would it be? And I really thought long and hard about it, and I asked a lot of people about it, and I finally decided that it would be to have every third grader read at grade level, because that's a huge indicator of whether you're going to drop out, whether you're going to be able to succeed, whether you're able to go on to college. Imagine if we had every third grader in the country able to read at third grade level when they were in third grade. It would make an enormous difference, and would open that path to opportunity to a lot of kids who aren't finding that opportunity now.
I actually disagree with you, and I think micro-targeting is very important, and I think it's something that Democrats have done tremendously successfully. You don't go and say different things to different people, but certainly there's a fine line between speaking about some specifics that certain groups are interested in and pandering. And it's very important, I think, to do the first. If you're coming down to Miami, we want to hear about your policy towards Cuba, your policy towards Latin America. We want to hear that you understand foreign trade, that you understand. If you go to Texas, it's a completely different set of, of priorities. If you go to Arizona, people want to know that you're understanding the border issues. So I do think micro-targeting to women, micro-targeting to Hispanics, micro-targeting to other groups has a great deal of effect and beneficial. And we need to learn how to do it so that it doesn't sound like pandering. President Bush used to, with no qualms or shame, butcher the Spanish language every time he was in a Spanish crowd. Now, you all know he couldn't speak Spanish, right? But you know what? He got tremendous brownie points and kudos and credit from the community for trying so hard. We knew he was doing it.
Sometimes butchered the English language.
Well, he was
we never could get him to say nuclear right.
He was an equal opportunity offender.
I tried.
Yeah. So Kerry's been dying to jump in here.
If I could get back, though, to the crux of this gentleman's question, which was around excluding people from the party. We can't be in the business of excluding people from the party, but what we can do is to keep any extreme element of the party from excluding others. And that's what we're working on here tonight. And what I'm trying to get out there as a concept, that we need to never have another discussion around litmus tests in our party. We need to abandon litmus tests, because if we are going to welcome people in, how can we say, we can't have that person, he used to be a Democrat. Well, guess what? That's how we're going to win, is if we convert a bunch of Democrats. So in the future, we can never say, ask for some sort of ideological purity or some history of membership in the Republican Party. We have to say, we welcome you. If you consider yourself a conservative, you're a conservative. And that's good enough. And hopefully, that will increase our numbers enough so that you don't have to worry about the people who you feel don't represent you as conservatives.
But we do have to acknowledge we have a long way to go in that, because I am a conservative, pro-life Republican who happens to care about some things like the environment, which is a little, as Kerry said, we haven't talked about that enough as a party. So like Anna said, you get labeled. I'm an established, I read in the paper, suddenly I'm described as an establishment Republican. And
I've been described
I'm
that
a
way
rhino
before.
sometimes.
We're all established Republicans here
But
right now.
exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of labeling going on in the party. Well, they're rhinos, Republicans in name only. And we've got to all call that out when it happens, and because we don't want to have a party that basically is saying you're not welcome, which is what we say when we're...
By saying nobody's going to question my right to be a Republican. I think I got you beat, because I'm a woman, immigrant, Hispanic, pro-gay rights, pro-immigration reform, who thinks there is climate change. And you know what? Nobody's going to kick me out of that tent.
Good. Let's come back up here to the microphone in the front.
Hi, my name's Amna Hashmi. I'm a freshman here at the college, and I'm a member of the JFK Forum Junior Committee. And so I'm asking this question on behalf of all our Twitter and Facebook followers, and which is, where do you think is the common ground for socially liberal fiscal conservatives and the other members of their party?
I think it's pretty clear. I think you can coalesce around foreign policy issues. I think you can coalesce around states' rights and economic issues. And that's a very solid core that runs right from the libertarian side all the way through the social conservatives, all the way to the moderates. And if we look at that first and foremost when we're thinking about what is a conservative and then everything else is kind of an add-on, I think we can really pull things together as a party.
And I'd just add to that, one of the things that has been so much fun for me when I worked in Congress was to travel and to meet entrepreneurs and go to Silicon Valley, come up here. I'm from Seattle, huge biotech community. One of the things that I don't understand why we've sort of let go of it, but is a real core sense of Republican being, is the sort of entrepreneurial, earn your own success nature of this country. It is propelled forward by people who wake up every single day saying, I'm going to start a new business. I'm going to take a risk, and if I fail, I might do it again. Most of the places in the world, that doesn't happen. If you go to lots of places in Europe, and I took a trip, a bipartisan trip to France, the idea that you would do that, it doesn't even cross their mind. So I think one of the things we need to do, and this gets at being the idea of inclusivity, is we stand for things that are at the core of sort of the American ethos, which is growth, opportunity, taking risk, and not being afraid to do that, and building in your communities. And I think along the way, we've allowed ourselves, and this is where I think the baubles idea is a little bit right, we've allowed ourselves to chase things, to say, if we don't deal with that, we're sunk. And I'm not saying that that's inaccurate to a certain degree, but in the meantime, what we've stopped doing is saying, hey, we have a lot of good ideas, and we have a position that allows us to offer a contrast to the other party and to the leaders of that party and say, you have a choice to make. And we've lost sort of our ability to articulate that as we've gotten in these pitched battles on some other things. And I think getting back to that is going to be critical.
We've got a lot of people who want to ask some questions, so I'm going to ask the panelists to help with that. up here in the box.
My name is Advik Srikumar. I'm a freshman at the college and a registered Democratic voter. And my question returns to something that Mr. Christie had said, which was that many Republican congresspeople were looking for talking points. And after a general election where both President Obama and Governor Romney received less than 50% true or mostly true rating from PolitiFact, I was wondering what the panel thought the future of the Republican Party and the future of politics would be in terms of truthful politicians, politicians who run based on, very much factual statements, trying to get a high truth rating.
Oh, forget it.
Yeah. I'll start. I'll tell you, I think one of the reasons why the American people distrust Washington and distrust politicians so much is that they don't believe anything that's coming out of their mouths, right? I mean, they don't. Congress has somewhere between a 9 and an 11% approval rating. Why? Because Republicans will tell you, we've got everything figured out. We just cut taxes. The economy's going to boom and surge again. And then Democrats will come back and say, if the Republicans cut taxes, then they're going to take away grandma's Social Security check, and they're going to throw Granny also out of her Medicare and Medicaid. And I think that as people who are engaged in the public arena, you need to be very truthful about what our policies mean and what their specific impact would be. And I'll give you just one. I think Republicans are getting their clock cleaned, and one of the things that we should talk about more is energy policy. If you look at energy policy, if you look around this country where the states that have the lowest unemployment rates, if you look at the Dakotas, if you look at Western Pennsylvania, you look around, why? Because these people are engaged in fracking. They are extracting energy from out of the ground. They're providing thousands of jobs. They're stimulating their local economies. But Republicans refuse in many ways to engage on this because they're going to be told that they're the party of big oil. So I think that we need to have the courage of our convictions to talk about why our policies are the right way to move the country, what the alternative is, which is kind of the status quo of where we are, and to be very truthful about it. And it has to start at the local level. Anytime that you try to do it from Washington and push it out, it's the wrong approach, but you have to do it from the grassroots going up and also from our national leaders coming down.
Next question up here in the other box.
Hi.
Oh, and by the way, when I said affiliation, what I really meant is like student, faculty, member of the community. I mean, you can tell us what your party affiliation is, but don't feel obligated to do so. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Victor Navarro. I'm a Cambridge Republican. I'm just a resident here. And my family lives in Texas, in Galveston, Texas. My father works for UTMB. And I just wanted to thank Kerry Healey for welcoming the Ron Paul supporters. There's a lot of them. We are now have a name called the Liberty Movement. We're mostly libertarians. But I just wanted to state that we are all different types of people. We're black, there's women, there are Iraqis, if you didn't know that. There's veterans, there was gay people, there's Latinos in this movement. There's a lot of different people, and I hope the Republican Party will welcome us. And we are very outgoing, we're very energetic, and I just wanted to thank you again, Kerry Healey, but my question is, are you going to run for U.S. Senate for Massachusetts?
No, but I promise we'll have a wonderful, wonderful candidate who will represent the new face of the Republican Party in the Northeast.
Thank you.
Up here in front, Derek, make sure you tell everybody what state you're from. I think it's really important everybody hears that.
I'm Derek Baker-Breda.
Only for Derek, not for all you other people asking questions.
I'm from Kentucky.
Thank you.
And I'm also a Republican. So I'm a senior here at the college. And my question was, do you believe that the Republican Party can compete for the youth vote without addressing the environment that many voting youth find themselves in, which are liberal universities where conservative ideas are very much not welcome? And if so, can you think of a way for the Republican Party to actually break into this environment where we've been on the defensive for decades?
Ron, this might be a good one for you since you've taught here and you've taught in other universities.
Well, in full disclosure, I went as an undergraduate to Haverford College in Pennsylvania and loved it, had a great experience, and have taught there and have also obviously taught here. And one of the things I think Republicans need to do a better job of is entering academia. A lot of Republicans say, oh, well, those left-wingers, they're indoctrinating the students and they're all left-wingers. I have had more really productive interactions with students here at the college and at my alma mater who really push you and challenge you to think what you think, and they come away and go, gosh, all you Republicans aren't as crazy as I thought. But the flip side of that equation is that I think our colleges and universities, by and large, that are overwhelmingly liberal, do a disservice to the students that they serve. My job is not to indoctrinate you based on my political philosophy or my opinions. My job is to lay out the evidence, and trained as a lawyer, and let you decide, gee, I think this is kind of where I feel more comfortable. But until Republicans get involved in academia and that they are willing to go through and to deal with some of the hostility that is out there that I've certainly faced, then we're not going to change that perception. And also, our job as Republicans is not to indoctrinate students, it's to educate students and allow them to make the best informed decision.
And just building on that a little bit, I think one of the things we do need to do, and this is members of Congress, senators, everyone in our party, all of us, we can't be afraid to go to places that everyone is not just agreeing with everything we say and make our case and make a statement. I think we have a whole world that operates in our party that will only watch certain channels and only read certain newspapers, and now will only look at a hyper-targeted blog that's only talking about the very thing they like in the language they like. And I think if we don't have the courage of our convictions to go out and convince people that we have ideas and that we're willing to both admit that the other side does have ideas and that we're thinking about them, but then offer counter arguments, then shame on us. And no wonder no one understands what we stand for or why they should support what we're doing.
And I think an aspect that we haven't touched on that is very important to reach all voters, but particularly young voters, is the technology aspect. We seem to have a lot of nerds in the Republican Party, but not enough geeks. And I think we learned that in the last election. When I was here the last time, and we had that
The campaign decision makers conference.
At the decision makers conference, and we went through what the two different campaigns had done. Turns out Republicans are somewhere in the last millennium when it comes to technology outreach. And now, I see the young kids in my family, they don't even have voices anymore. They just talk through iPads and iPhones and things. So we need to get better at that, invest, really, do it now as part of our party building in between elections, because it is a way where we're going to reach youth voters and every voter.
Okay, I have a question for you. Are you a member of the Harvard Republican Club?
I was president for the past year.
Excellent. Okay, so tell me then, how many members do you have?
Close to 100.
Close to 100. Well, in 1978, when I was membership of the Harvard Republican, membership secretary, because I was a girl, of the Harvard Republican Club, they had 12 members. So you're doing quite well.
Okay. And I met with a lot of them last night. They were a great group, so very impressive group.
Thanks, Derek. Next question.
Hi, my name is John. I'm a junior at the college from Turkey. As for party affiliation, I just like getting popcorn and watch the two parties fight because I can't vote. No.
You come to the IFP for the food is what you're saying, right? No, that's okay. I do too.
I wanted to switch gears and ask about foreign policy because I believe social and economic policy has been talked about a lot. I was wondering what you thought about the future of the foreign policy of the Republican Party, given that the Bush era really transformed it, and I mean that's kind of evident from the way Chuck Hagel's nomination was received. So where do you think the mainstream foreign policy of the Republican Party going in the future years?
Well, I can say one thing that I miss in foreign policy discussions with Republicans now, and I was the foreign policy coordinator for the Romney campaign, is that there is now, it seems, a reticence to talk about human rights issues that was not present during the Bush years. President Bush was very willing to talk about the importance of democracy, the importance of human rights internationally, and I think that our party is poorer because we are not willing to step up and at least vocalize support for those who take great risks to pursue democracy and freedom, and in support of those who are suffering because their human rights are being violated. And I think that that's a role that we as a party miss, and we need to get back to that, and I think that that's part of our core message.
I agree with that. I mean, I think our party stands for, our country stands for what President Bush called the non-negotiable demands of human dignity. And we need to be a loud and proud and strong voice across the world for human rights and human freedom. And one of my criticisms of the current administration is that I think President Obama's administration has not done that, which is somewhat ironic, because you tend to associate Democratic administrations more with advocating for human rights, and yet it was President Bush who met with dissidents, who spoke out for greater rights for women, Laura Bush, who did the radio address about the plight of women in Afghanistan. The world, I believe, needs to know that the United States of America will always be on the side of human rights and human freedom. And President Bush made that very clear. And one of my criticisms of the current administration is I don't think they've done so.
And I hope our party will continue that tradition and revive that tradition vigorously in the next election cycle.
And I also think it's important that we confront tendencies toward isolationism, there are strains of that in both parties, on the right of the Republican Party and on the left of the Democratic Party. And we really need, in my role at the State Department, I saw firsthand the importance of our engagement with audiences across the world and the difference that we make when we work for what I call the deeds of our diplomacy across the world. And we are, as a country, enormously important to the expansion of opportunity across the world. We invest in education, in health, in economic opportunity for people in some of the poorest places in the world, and I think it's vitally important that we resist the tendency to just And frankly, President Obama is promoting this a little too when he talks about nation building at home, which is a powerful line, but I hope that he doesn't mean to signal that he wants to retreat from us championing greater human dignity, human rights, human freedom across the world.
We're probably going to have time for 2 more questions. I apologize to the folks who are standing up, but I mentioned that just because that means you don't have to keep standing up and then be disappointed. This gentleman here and this woman here, we'll start over here with the box. Yes.
Hello, my name is Pete Rodrigue. I'm in the college. I'm from Dallas, Texas. And the fellow earlier mentioned truth and lies in politics. And when people say things like that, I immediately think campaign finance. So why do politicians tell lies? I think because they're beholden to expensive corporate lobbies. So my question is, as a party that's generally perceived to be kind of cozy with corporations and money, generally speaking, not that that's always a bad thing, what do you guys think? Comment, please.
I'm happy to talk about that since that's
as
in
the
my
super
lane.
PAC guy.
First, I would say the premise of the question suggests that the Democratic Party is not aligned with large groups that fund lots of things, which is not quite accurate.
No, I agree.
But I would say this, at the expense of my own business model, I am troubled by the length of campaigns and the expense of campaigns. Now, there are lots of actors that drive that. There are TV and news stations that make lots and lots of money in election years running ads. There are grassroots organizations that are funded by saying we are going to support the hard left or hard right candidate. So the question I have is, how do you define, given that we all believe in this country in the freedom of speech and expression, a mechanism through which you could have a more condensed campaign process that perhaps shrunk the amount of money required and therefore changed the dynamics of fundraising and otherwise. I will tell you, having worked for a House member, a leadership House member, the amount of time and energy you have to expend on raising money both for yourself and for the party is unbelievable. And then you go all the way up through the system, whether you're a senator, and then if you're the holding president, I mean, the amount of time you have to spend, and you see the president now, traveling constantly to raise money for the party. So I think it's less of a question of who's cozy with who, and more of a question of how are we looking at our overall political process. And my wife is Australian. You know, that's like a 2-week campaign, and it's very set, and you can't run ads. So I think the question is all of the players that are in the pool are going to have to give things up in order to change the need for the economics of campaigning. And when the economics of campaigning change, I think some of the concerns, and if I were in the public, I would look and say, wow, billions? We spent billions on the last campaign cycle? That's an incredible amount of money. And where did it go? And what did it do? And so I would have concerns there too. So I think we collectively in the political class need to think about that. But I sort of don't agree with the idea of, well, one team is more or less sort of affiliated with that activity.
Well,
Everybody's been the same.
You know, lies, as you call them, I would say fudging the facts or stretching the truth. I think it's voters who have the power to stop that. And the more sophisticated and educated the voters, you know, through all of these things, the more that politicians will be held accountable. We saw 2 specific examples, at least, in this campaign. We saw the ad from the Obama camp where they were blaming Governor Romney for a woman's death, basically, killing a woman from cancer. And the backlash was such that they basically never put it on the air. And then on the other hand, we saw the Jeep ad that also had a backlash because it fudged and it was somewhat confusing. And that had an effect on voters in Ohio, we found out. So I think it's the voters that have the power. We can't expect for politicians to police themselves. That's the voters' job. That's all of ours jobs.
I would also argue that the focus on polling is probably more detrimental to truth in politics than is money. I think the politicians constantly worry that if they take a particular stance, that they're going to lose votes. And if voters were more likely to reward a candidate for authenticity, for saying, I agree with you in these 4 things, but I really don't agree with you in this 5th, then maybe they'd hear the truth more often and not have that politician doing handstands trying to agree on the 5th thing.
We've got time for a final question.
Therese Rohrbeck. I'm a graduate of Harvard Law School, class of 2008. I'm from Massachusetts. My question is, what is the future of the Massachusetts Republican Party, and how do we get there, especially in light of the youth who've graduated and struggled in the recession? It seems at this moment that there's nobody at the state level or even at the national level who represents us or our voice.
I presume that's addressed to me as a former chairman of the Massachusetts Republican Party and current National Committee woman. I believe that we have just elected a very young, vivacious, intelligent, and somehow still experienced young woman to lead the Massachusetts Republican Party, Kirsten Hughes. We just elected her last Thursday. I think it's too soon to suggest that she has already failed. I think that she will have new ideas and that we have a lot of new blood in the party. As I have said several times this evening, I'm hoping that we do welcome in the Ron Paul folks into our party here in Massachusetts. There's a lot of them. They're young. They've got great ideas. And a lot of energy. And so I think we should just pause, because every single year or so we announce the death of the Republican Party in Massachusetts, and then somehow we get a Mitt Romney elected, or somehow we get a Scott Brown elected, and then we're revived, and then somehow we're okay again. So we're just in hiatus right now, and we just need to be patient and wait for that new blood to come in, and it will come.
Great. Well, that's going to have to be our final comment for the evening. I want to thank the audience. We had a great crowd tonight for our first forum of the semester. So thanks to all of you for coming out. First, yeah, go ahead and give yourself some applause. That's good.
Thank you all.
On web meeting on Friday at 3 o'clock. Do we know where yet? Kirk, no. Somewhere, we'll let you know where. At 3 o'clock on Friday, we're going to have an open house. You can meet our fellows, learn about. We moved it back to 3. It might be at Kirkland House, it might be here, it may not be happening because of the weather. But if you're an undergrad, mark your calendar at 3 o'clock. Fellows, you'll be in the right spot at the right time. Thanks, we'll see you throughout the semester at the forum.
What's that? Right, because we drink. Yes, exactly.